All right, so let's talk about one of the, I would say more popular, certainly more common families. Certainly this is a family that you've probably already interacted with, one you're definitely going to interact with. It's certainly one of the most well-known families in North America, let's say that, which is the Centrarchidae, or the sunfish. Now, what we're talking about here are the crappies, the black basses, and the panfish. And you've got fish in there like rock bass and flyers and things, but they're not common enough and we don't have specimens in the collection, so we're just going to concentrate on these because these are the ones you're going to run into the most. And so yeah, there's about 19 Kentucky species. They're, like I said, they're very common, they're very popular. In fact, the state fish of Kentucky is the Kentucky bass, which is a centrarchid. This is some data from the data on fishing and angling in the United States, and you can see these are the most popular species that are sought by anglers, except for the Great Lakes, most popular freshwater fish. And if you look, 1, 2, 3 of the top 5 are centrarchids, right? Black bass being the most popular. Okay, some general characteristics, they are nest builders. And so we've talked about different kinds of nests, and we talked about like the stickleback, you know, and they make that sort of cave nest, and they build it with secretions from their kidneys. And we talk about reds that salmon make, and a lot of cyprinids will make a kind of a similar thing to a red. The centrarchid nest is a circular depression that the male sweeps clean. And then the male courts the female, and usually there's a lot of signaling. I don't know, I'm sure there's probably some acoustic signaling, but there's definitely color signaling, and I've witnessed this. I've watched like crappie spawn, and you definitely see a very obvious color change. Again, we talked about color, and we talked about the chromatophores and the fish skin and how they make their color, and we've got a couple things that control the color, right? Hormones can control how many chromatophores you have, and neurons can control is the pigment spread out or concentrated, which, you know, is the fish colorful or bleached out. And in general, you'll see the males, it's more of a hormonal change. And so as the spawning season progresses, they get very, very colorful, and they stay very colorful until they're done spawning. Whereas the females do color up some, but it's more of a quick hormonal thing, which perhaps she uses to signal the male that she's ready to spawn. And then for a lot of the species, the male will guard the nest after the eggs are fertilized, and sometimes they'll even guard the fry after they hatch. And so the male does a lot of the protection. This is just a picture. This structure you see here is a common structure, artificial structure that's put in reservoirs that are lacking good spawning substrate. These are called spawning benches. And here you've got a smallmouth that's built its nest, and you can see it's a big circular depression. Okay, again, how do we recognize this family? Well, you know a lot of these species already. They do look quite a bit like the Moronidae, but our big difference here is how the spinous and the soft dorsals relate to one another. They're going to be connected to some degree in the centrarchids, but they're separate in the Moronidae. So here you can see in the centrarchid in the upper left how those two fins are connected, but in the Moronidae that's in the lower right, those two are separate. So that's an easy way to tell these apart. Okay, so like I said, there are some other species like flyers, rock bass that we will run into, but really we're going to concentrate on the 3 biggies in Centrarchidae. The 3 main genera are Pomoxis, which are your crappies, Lepomis, which are your panfish, or brim, they call them down here in the south, and the Micropterus, which are the black basses. And so I've got a lot on each of these, so I split it into three. So our first one's going to be Pomoxis we're going to talk about. And so we've got two species here, the white crappie and the black crappie. Understand that the full name is white crappie and the full name is black crappie. Sometimes when you're talking about them together, people say black and white crappie when they mean both species. But that sounds like a black and white crappie, which doesn't exist. So it's a ticky-tack thing, but I got yelled at it whenever I was in grad school, so I'm going to yell at you guys for it. It's white crappie and black crappie is the full name. And so the distinguishing characteristic of this genus is their large anal fin. They've got a very noticeable large anal fin, and it has 5 spines, whereas like the Lepomis will only have 3 spines. So how do we tell these two species apart? The white crappie has 5 or 6 spines in its dorsal fin, and it has vertical bars. The black crappie has 7 or 8 dorsal spines, and it doesn't have vertical bars, it has specks or spots. So think about the black 8 ball, right? The 8 ball in pool is black. The black crappie has 8 spines, 7 or 8 spines. Now, that characteristic, there is some overlap, but I've looked at thousands of these, and it's very, very rare that you see any kind of overlap. So that dorsal spine, although I've seen papers where they've shown there's some overlap, in general, this is a pretty consistent, easy way to identify them. And so here you can see the vertical bars, which are usually pretty noticeable in the white crappie. Also, the white crappie is a little bit skinnier and longer snout. It's got that little, if you look at the eye on this one, it's got that little dip in there. They actually have an extra little bone up there. Again, I saw a paper where they showed that. And so they're a little bit longer and more slender, whereas your black crappie is a little bit more short and deeper bodied. But again, think of the black 8 ball. This fish has got black 8 spines, and so it's a black crappie. And you also see that this doesn't have the vertical bars. They call these specks. Another cool name for the white crappie is the bachelor fish, which I think is a cool name. And the Cajuns will call crappies sac à lait, which is, I think, French for sack of milk, because they're big and fat and they got that beautiful white flesh. People also call them paper mouths because they've got that big mouth that's paper thin. Crappies are an interesting fish. They are very comfortable eating whatever. They're very omnivorous. And so they will live a long time if they're only eating insects and other inverts. They won't get big. The anglers won't like them, but they'll live 10, 12 years and spawn every year and just be happy. But if they get on fish, then they can grow very large, like the anglers like them, and they've got the mouth for it. So they have this mouth that can get very large, that can help them eat fish, but they can also use it to eat other things. So I've had a couple crappies in a tank for a long time, and I got some videos showing them taking food from the surface. So take a look at these just so you can see how that mouth, how big that mouth can extend and suck in the food. So here we see a crappie sucking a piece of food into its mouth. And you can see exactly how they do this. They rapidly expand their buccal cavity, or their oral cavity, which for a split second creates an area of low pressure relative to the outside of the fish. And so the food actually gets pushed into their mouth because this expanding buccal cavity creates an area of low pressure. And that's how a lot of fish suck food into their mouths. All right. This is a color morph that is pretty common down here in the South. I think it first originally popped up and was common in Oklahoma. And this is the Blacknose Crappie, which is a black crappie that's got a solid stripe going. You can see it going all the way down from its dorsal fin all the way to across its lips and down to its bottom lip. And so this is just a naturally occurring color morph. I think it might be a dominant trait, but you find it a lot these days because people use them as a natural marker. And so if they were stocking crappie and they wanted to see how their stocking would go, they would purposely breed and stock Blacknose Crappie because now you've got this natural marker. And so consequently you see these in quite a few places. Okay, the two species commonly hybridize in nature. And so for example, Lake Weiss, Alabama, which is a famous crappie hotspot, over half of the crappie are some kind of hybrid. And sometimes you call this a hybrid swarm, where you've got two pure species and they hybridize, and then the hybrids can breed with each other to make F2 hybrids, or the hybrids can breed back with the parentals to make some sort of FX hybrid. And so then those offspring are hybrids which can breed with the F1s or the other parentals. And so you end up with this hodgepodge. This is sometimes a concern how we can lose species if they can hybridize and one species loses its genetic identity. It's not going to happen in crappie, but in some reservoirs you can find this. You can see where you've got a lot of hybrids. And like I said, you've got the F1, which is the cross between the parentals. If the F1s cross, it's an F2, but if the F1s cross back with a parental, you call it an FX. And so that's how you can get a lot of hybrids. We did a little research on this in Southern Illinois, and we found some hybrids, but a much lower percentage, from 0 to 8%. The hybrids in general tend to look more like black crappie than they do white crappie, but there's no real good way to diagnose them. You will look at that and say, that's a funny looking crappie. And so when we looked at lots and lots of these crappies, and we would mark down what we thought, whether it was a white crappie or a black crappie or a hybrid, and almost every one that we said looks funny and we think is a hybrid turned out, when we tested the genetics, to actually be a hybrid. So your mind will kind of notice it. Here is I spawned a bunch of these, and so this is purposely made hybrid crappie, and you can see the shape is a lot like a black crappie. But one of the things that you can kind of see in this fish is that it has the spots of a black crappie, but they tend to be kind of in the vertical bars of a white crappie. That's often what triggers it for me. The spines on the dorsal fin do not help you at all in this. It could be any number of spines. Here's a really nice hybrid crappie that we shocked up. Now I know this was a hybrid because I know that that's what they stocked in this lake. And so in Illinois for a while they were stocking hybrids because they had some evidence that they did grow better than the parentals and they didn't reproduce as much. But I don't know if that's a strong, the effects to me did not seem strong enough to justify stocking the hybrids. Okay, so that's part one. Our first group, which is genus Pomoxis. And so we've got the Lipomus and the Micropterus we'll talk about next. So I'll see you in a second.